I have Democratic leanings. I'm in there fighting on Democratic issues all the time. But, you know, I am a newspaper columnist. I got to be here on a nonpartisan basis. I can't be a partisan here today. I don't think that would be appropriate. I sort of need that on the record in case the governor has a tracker here or somebody. I don't know if you've noticed, he started new newspapers and social media outlets that pretend to be newspapers. So it's all going to be part of the new mix here in Illinois. I came out of respect for Mike, who invited me, and out of respect for all of you who have, as an organization, who have sent some of our finest public officials down to Springfield. And of course, I'm here for the greater glory of the Sun-Times, which somehow or another is still in business, right? And I'm also, I want to say, and I'm always eager to get out the word that people like me need people like you to tell us what's going on in the community. The truth is, though, that I really hate public speaking. And this goes back to when I was in 8th grade. It was Mr. Adams' science class. Well, I fainted, okay? Splat, hit the floor, the whole 9 yards. The last thing I remember seeing as I was going down was the look on the face of Carol Lichtenberg, who was this girl I had a crush on and was always open to impress, and that was pretty much the end of it that day. Something like that will stick with you for a long time. I've always wanted to ask Bill Daley about that face plant he took when they announced him as Commerce Secretary, but I've never had the nerve. There's some smart folks coming on the program behind me who are going to talk about the important issues of the day, these democratic solutions. I was hoping that left an opening for me to be more of the entertainment. I didn't see any juggling sticks and business. So, with that in mind, I'm calling this speech 6 Things I've Learned Covering Illinois Politics. In today's newspaper business, it's important to put a number on it like that. I couldn't just say things I've learned from Illinois politics. If you put a number on it, then they call that a listicle. And a listicle will get more hits online. That's one of the reasons I will soon be extinct in the newspaper business, because I'm not adapting very well. I actually I got to the Sun-Times in 1982. I started covering Illinois politics seriously in 1977. I was a grad student in the public affairs reporting program at what was then called Sangamon State University. Everybody's hearing me, right? I just realized I hit the microphone. That's now University of Illinois Springfield. It was an internship program. We took classes for 6 months, then we worked for one of the State House bureaus. I was the Sun-Times intern. But during the first 6 months, I did some freelance writing for the Old Suburban Trib, where I'd worked the previous summer. And that's when I first managed to get crossways with the Speaker of the House. No, not that Speaker of the House. In 1977, the Speaker of the House was Bill Redmond, a Democrat from DuPage County, of all places. I think that makes me pretty unusual right there, a working reporter in Illinois who remembers a time before Mike Madigan was Speaker of the House. Elmer remembers. What was that like, you may ask? Well, I'm sorry to say I don't think it was much different, actually. Of course, Madigan was the majority leader, and I'm pretty sure he was already running things. The biggest difference in those days was we still had cumulative voting. That's this odd system where we would elect 3 House members from the same district, 2 from one political party and 1 from the other. As I understand it, Redmond got to be Speaker because the Democrats couldn't agree. Redmond cut a deal with Daley and a couple of Republicans who crossed over to vote for him. One of those Republicans was a guy named Lee Daniels, who some of you also remember. But somehow or another, while I'd been doing that freelance work, I'd written something that wasn't to the liking of Redmond, which I didn't know anything about until our teacher arranged to take us in to meet him. And Redmond used the occasion to dress me down in front of my classmates. I remember I'm 22 years old. It caught me by surprise. I can't even remember what I'd done to provoke it. But later my teacher asked me why I hadn't fought back and defended myself. And honestly, it never really occurred to me. As a reporter, you're taught to keep your opinions to yourself and not make yourself the story, unlike us columnists who have to make everything about us. But I also think I realized something else even back then, which has been reinforced through my years in the newspaper business. It's not that I would ever abuse the power, mind you, but I have often found that those who would mistreat or disrespect a reporter forget that we have a lot of leeway in how we decide to tell a story. And a columnist even more so. So that brings us to lesson number 1, which is it's always good to have the last word. Now, Redmond was among many legislators later pushed out by Pat Quinn's cutback amendment, which created single-member districts for House members. I'm often hearing from people from Illinois who still want to bring back cumulative voting. They thought it was a better system. They say it produced many of our best legislators, and that was true. And they say it helped create an atmosphere where it was easier to compromise. But I always remember that it produced some of our crookedest state legislators, along with a nasty little man named Bill Redmond. And if I ever had a chance to write about cumulative voting, I just might be compelled to point that out. But of course I won't, because the addendum to lesson number 1, which is, while it's good to have the last word, it should be exercised judiciously. That internship program in Springfield had been started by the late Senator Paul Simon, well before he became a senator. And by the time I got there, he'd already been elected to Congress. Now, I always had a lot of respect for Paul Simon. He's one of those rare people in politics that as a journalist even, I just choose to believe in that he's the real deal. I imagine from the voting patterns up here that a lot of you would feel the same way. As some of you might remember, Simon had been a newspaper man in his younger days, and so there was even more reason for somebody like me to be interested in what he'd have to say. Then after I got to Chicago, I had a chance to cover his campaign for the U.S. Senate against Chuck Percy in 1984. We were on a campaign fly-around crisscrossing the state. You ever notice that that's one of our favorite cliches in the newspaper business? They crisscrossed the state in the last week before an election. And Simon gave me some advice that I find valuable to this very day. We'd just flown into Rockford, one of those small prop planes, and as soon as I got inside the terminal, I made a beeline for the bathroom. And right in behind me comes Paul Simon. And while we're standing there, taking care of business, and I'll never forget this, Paul sort of turns to me and said, "Mark, I learned a long time ago that you should never pass up a chance to go to the bathroom on the campaign trail." You can imagine how that would make an impact on a young person. So that's lesson number 1 in politics, Illinois politics, or no, number 2. Never pass up a chance to go to the bathroom on the campaign trail. As the years have gone by, I've learned to incorporate the senator's wisdom into other aspects of my life. Now it's never pass up a chance to go to the bathroom. Earlier that year, I also had a chance to accompany, I could use a water if anybody's got one back there. I had a chance to accompany the Reverend Jesse Jackson to Cuba. This was way before Americans were permitted to travel there. It was a strange trip. Jesse had just finished his campaign for president and done well enough that the party thinking needed to find something to sort of placate him, to keep him from turning against the party and taking his supporters with them before the convention. Remind you of anybody right now? So they helped make it possible for him to lead his own freelance diplomatic mission to Central America. Now, Central America was a hot spot at the time. Sandinistas were still in power in Nicaragua, and there was civil war in El Salvador. And Jesse thought he could broker peace. He also somehow cooked up a deal with Fidel Castro to release dozens of Cuban political prisoners. So we arrived in Havana, and when we did that, Cubans assigned each of us a liaison or a minder, right? This was somebody who could speak English. As you might imagine, the lead paragraph in my story contained the words, Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, right? I mean, you're in Cuba, Jesse's meeting with Castro. But as soon as the words came out of my mouth, the phone line went dead. I just assumed it was a bad connection. I called back, connection was fine. I said, Cuban dictator again, and click, dial tone. You get the picture. The next time I called, I changed it to Cuban President Fidel Castro, and everything worked out just fine. I finished dictating the story, and at the end, I told the rewrite man to change president back to dictator. That was lesson number 3. Sometimes in life you have to adapt. Chicago Alderman Bill Henry taught me lesson number 4. I think Mike would know Bill. I knew Bill a little from my time in Springfield. He'd been a legislator before moving to the city council. He was a good source for me and a lot of reporters. Bill was pretty much the opposite of Paul Simon. He was as crooked as they come. But in a strange way, he was almost honest about it. Everybody loved Bill because, I don't know, he just had a way of letting you know with a smile when he was lying to you. They used to say that the trouble with Bill wasn't that he could be bought, it was that he couldn't stay bought, because he would always sell out to the next highest bidder. Bill was eventually indicted by the feds, but he died of cancer before they could convict him, so, you know, that was a victory because he doesn't show up on those lists of aldermen who went to prison. But long before that, I'd been over at City Hall one day when Bill told me that he had a hot tip, and he pulled me into a room so he wouldn't be overheard. Bill says to me, "The Italians got the trucks." Well, what was that supposed to mean? It took a while, but I pulled out a bill that he was trying to tell me that the mob controlled the city's trucking contracts. I told Bill, that's great, but, you know, I need specifics. What contracts? Which Italians? And Bill looks even more conspiratorial, and he calls me over to the side in this room. He says, "Mark, you know that one hand washes the other." Well, I was kind of new, I was still naive, but I came to understand pretty quickly that Bill was either telling me I needed to pay him money or do him a favor if I wanted to get the information. Suffice to say, I never got that story. It would be 25 years later before my colleague Tim Novak would follow a hunch and uncover the hired truck scandal, which in essence was the Bridgeport mob controlling wasteful city contracts. I didn't get the story, but I did learn a valuable lesson. Lesson number 4, when somebody tells you that one hand washes the other, it's time to leave. No amount of soap's going to help there. Now, for most of my career at the Sun-Times before I became a columnist, I was an investigative reporter picking on politicians, is what I used to call it. In 1990, we did some stories about Illinois Treasurer Jerry Cosentino, who owned a trucking business on the side. Bill Henry wasn't talking about him, I should. One of the stories involved how Cosentino had moved his trucking company very quietly out of Illinois, on paper at least, to avoid Illinois business regulations, especially workers' comp costs. Rauner would have a field day with that, wouldn't he? Cosentino set up a phony mail drop at a motel in Indiana and headquartered the company there. To make the story complete, though, we needed to find some truck drivers who had been screwed over on their workman's comp. All kinds of trouble, and tracked down a guy who worked for Cosentino's company, and he agreed to meet me in Springfield. I think we even met in the airport. And I'm sitting there in the lounge, and here comes this guy down the corridor, all contorted and limping, and I've never seen anything like it. It was really, he was just almost horribly deformed. He was hurt so bad, right? And he told me about all the pain he was in and how Jerry Cosentino was denying his workers' comp benefits, right? I couldn't wait to write it. The headline was Cosentino makes Indiana detour. We had a picture of the motel room on the front page, which it really looked pitiful, the name of his business. And inside there's my story on the poor victim. Big political hit for Cosentino at the time was running for Secretary of State against George Ryan. The next night somebody suggested we turn on Waller Jacobson's commentary on Channel 2. Well, Walter comes on with a story about our story, including an undercover video of my victim standing quite erect and loading bags of cement in his pickup truck and not showing the least signs of discomfort. It's not a good day to be me. But I learned a valuable lesson. Lesson number 5, if it seems too good to be true, ask more questions. Also, watch out for the victims. I should note parenthetically, Cosentino later indicted, convicted for bank fraud, sweetheart loans. Carrie Hamilton was here. Maybe she was in the office then, I don't know.
I was.
She probably knows the truth. But Jerry was also dying, so they let him off with home monitoring. Never saw prison. I always tell people it was Cook County Treasurer Maria Pappas who inspired me to become a columnist. It's true. She had just been elected, and she brought what I used to call the Forrest Claypool Transition Handbook to the Treasurer's Office. Forrest had used this method when he went in and cleaned up the Park District, and that meant that every day she would come up with some scandal, fresh scandal for the newspaper involving the former treasurer, Ed Rosewell. It was good publicity for herself. It showed, she was doing well. It wasn't too hard. There was a lot of problems in that office. Rosewell ended up indicted in the ghost payrolling scheme and was convicted, although he also died before he had to go to prison. Anybody detecting a pattern? Well, in her frenzy for good publicity, though, Maria was overreaching. So one day she holds a press conference. She's got it into her head that some of the big property owners in the city were paying their property taxes late on purpose because they were playing the float with their money. She deduced that it was advantageous for them to pay late because the county was only charging them 1.5% interest. Well, later, I looked into this. I'm trying to figure what, and somebody pointed out to me, well, it's 1.5% interest per month, which is 18%, 18% a year, right? Which was not a good rate to be borrowing money, not even then. I call Maria, I tell her about this. She just couldn't get her arms around it. To her, it was a 1.5%. So I made this call from the Daily Center press room, which is a room from about here to there, 5 desks, all reporters from the Tribune, the Law Bulletin, City News, and all of a sudden, I just start yelling at Maria Pappas on the phone. Maria, and of course I've worked with Maria as a county commissioner, right? Maria, you're the county treasurer now, and you can't do the math! It was that day that I realized I couldn't keep my opinions out of my reporting anymore and needed to do something else for a while. So after a year in sports, I got lucky and they gave me a column at the Sun-Times. And that, of course, was lesson number 6. You can't stand on the sidelines your whole life. Now, I want to thank you again for having me here today. I think I violated lesson number 6 by not tackling the democratic solutions topic head on. I apologize for that. I can assure you that I'm going to agree with 99% of what Biss and Nekritz will have to say when they get up here. So, if you get nothing else out of my talk, I would like you to please remember the words of the immortal Paul Simon, never pass up a chance to use the bathroom, and afterward, please allow the immoral Bill Henry to get the last word. One hand washes the other. They make a good combo. Thanks again.